It's Monday, the 23rd of August, 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Sean Aylmer. Prime Minister Scott Morrison changes direction, telling Australians that they'll need to live with COVID rather than expect it to be eradicated. That's our main story. Also coming up in today's podcast, Sydney Airport forecasts a strong pickup when people are finally allowed to travel again. Confidence among home buyers takes a tumble, and why wearing masks has been a boon for hearing implant group Cochlear. Then stay listening for my chat about the best discretionary stocks, think Wesfarmers and Domino's, to buy. But first, here's a brief look at markets. Wall Street was sharply higher over the weekend after some big falls during last week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended up 0.7%, the S&P 500 added 0.8%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq was 1.1% higher. European markets were also up. London's FTSE rose 0.4% and the Stoxx Europe 600 was 0.3% higher. The S&P ASX 200 closed down 4 points on Friday to finish what turned out to be a pretty tough week at 7,461 points. For the 5 sessions, the market ended down 2.2%. The utilities and consumer staples indices did best on Friday, while the materials and technology sectors did worst. Online marketplace for print-on-demand products, Redbubble, announced upbeat results and its share price jumped 16% on Friday, the best of the top 200. It was up nearly 40% in just 2 sessions. Kogan.com was another online marketplace to perform strongly, up 4% on Friday. But the battery metals groups had a rough day on Friday, based on a dive in sentiment out of demand from China. Lynas Rare Earths, Pilbara Minerals and Orocobre were down around 6%. Oil prices were down again over the weekend, with Brent crude trading around $65 a barrel. That was down almost 8% last week. Gold prices were flat. The price of iron ore tumbled late last week, with the commodity dropping nearly 15% on Friday to below $150 a tonne. 3 months ago, it hit a record $237 a tonne. Concerns about slower economic growth, particularly in China, sent several commodities lower, including oil, copper and other metals. But the slump in iron ore has surprised analysts, given the economic data out of China remains solid, if not spectacular. The falling price will hit economic growth and the budget bottom line here in Australia. For every $10 a tonne decrease in the price of iron ore, tax receipts fall by about $1.3 billion. International buyers of iron ore don't need as many Australian dollars to purchase the commodity, and that sent the currency lower. Also, the US dollar is the highest it's been against major currencies since November last year. The Aussie is currently trading at 71.3 US cents. The federal government has sided with New South Wales and accepted that it's highly unlikely that Australia will ever return to zero COVID cases, conceding that the Delta variant probably can't be eradicated. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the focus needed to shift to minimising hospitalisation rates rather than cases. The comments came as New South Wales recorded a record 830 community-transmitted cases yesterday, following 825 on Saturday. Mr Morrison said you can't live with lockdowns forever, and once vaccination rates got to 70% and eventually 80%, lockdowns would do more harm than good. He said at those vaccination rates, Australia needed to start living with COVID-19. People who are vaccinated will get more freedoms sooner than people who are not. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian is this week expected to outline when some restrictions in her state will be lifted. Meanwhile, New Zealand has seen a jump in cases, 72 in the last 5 days. And its COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, said there were going to be some pretty big questions about the Kiwis' approach of eliminating the disease. The country remains in lockdown. The tide is turning on living with COVID. While some, such as Western Australia's Mark McGowan, insist that zero eradication should be the goal, others, notably Ms Berejiklian and now Mr Morrison, are becoming much more pragmatic. Undoubtedly, Labor states, including Victoria, are getting antsy about New South Wales's approach. There's also growing concerns about the toll the lockdowns are taking on mental health across the country. And the modelling from the Doherty Institute, on which decisions have been made, didn't foresee a reopening of the economy with hundreds of new cases each day. Instead, it assumed there'd be a handful of cases when lockdowns ease. That's not likely to be what happens in New South Wales, and there's now debate within states about the rigour of the analysis. It's sure to make for an interesting National Cabinet meeting later in the week. The moral of it all? Get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated. In a moment, the rest of the news you need to know this morning. In overseas news, weekly COVID cases in the US exceeded 1 million last week for the first time since the height of the pandemic. Media reports in Japan say that some Olympic venues might be converted into field hospitals to cope with the growing number of cases. Thousands protested in France over the weekend about lockdowns, and the UK will this week make available antibody tests to better understand how many vaccinated and previously infected people are still catching the virus. The COVID crisis continues to dominate the globe. There have now been 211.4 million reported cases of COVID and 4.4 million deaths. There's been 4.9 billion vaccine doses administered. Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, remains in chaos, with 7 people over the weekend killed in a crush as people try to enter the city's airport. US officials have told its citizens in Afghanistan not to travel to the airport because it's just too dangerous. And one of Europe's most wanted criminals, Raffaele Imperiali, has been arrested after many years on the run. The Italian mafia cocaine trafficker, known as the Van Gogh boss for having 2 stolen paintings by the Dutch master, was arrested in Dubai, and Italian police said he was a leading exponent of international drug trafficking and money laundering, according to a report in the Financial Times. Locally, Sydney Airport, which last week knocked back a $30.3 billion bid from a consortium of mostly superannuation funds, said it had lost $97 million for the 6 months to the end of June, as international borders remained closed. Total passenger numbers were down 36% compared to a year earlier. International passengers pay higher fees than domestic travellers, so the border closures have hit particularly hard. But Chief Executive Jeff Colbert said people would be very keen to fly once restrictions were lifted. I think he's right. Sydney Airport will also overhaul its luxury shopping precinct in its international terminal, and Louis Vuitton will open a new shop next year along with 11 other brands, including Dior and Prada. Sydney Airport's share price fell slightly on Friday. The national auction clearance rate fell to its lowest level in a year over the weekend, though there's a big difference between Sydney and Melbourne. The clearance rate for capital cities across the nation was 63.3%, according to CoreLogic. The rate in Sydney, where private inspections are still allowed, was more than 80%, whereas in Melbourne it was less than 50%. And the total number of sales was down. Last week, REA Group said new property listings were down 10% nationally during July. Demand remains high, it's just that there's not as much stock on the market. One of the consequences of lockdown and mask wearing is that more people are realising that they have poor hearing because they can't read lips. As a result, sales in Cochlear's hearing implants have surged, and the group posted a big jump in underlying profit for the last financial year, though it didn't quite meet investor expectations. It triggered a 7% slump in the group's share price. Chief Executive Doug Howard said surgeries in China were growing quickly while parts of Eastern Europe and Middle East were recovering, but volumes were still much lower in India and Brazil. Crown Resorts CEO Steve McCann will relocate to Melbourne and take over the running of the group's South Bank Casino. There's a legal requirement for the boss of Crown's Melbourne Casino to be a Victorian resident. Of course, Crown is still waiting to see whether it has a casino licence in the state. Commissioner Ray Finkelstein is likely to give his recommendation about the licence to the Andrews government in October. Mining companies in Western Australia are facing allegations that they've covered up sexual assaults and harassments in the sector. In submissions to a state parliamentary inquiry last week, BHP detailed the prevalence of sexual assaults and harassment at its iron ore operations, including rape, and said it was taking steps to better protect women. Rio Tinto and Fortescue Metals have also made submissions pointing to the poor treatment of women in the WA iron ore industry, according to the Financial Review. The number of companies on the ASX 200 with a target of net zero emissions has tripled over the past year, according to a survey by the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors. There are now 49, up from 14, and the list includes market leaders Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, National Australia Bank, Rio Tinto and BHP. There were plenty of earnings reports out late last week. It included Inghams, which doubled its earnings off a pickup in volume, Corporate Travel Management, which called on the government to support the travel sector, warning that lockdowns were making it difficult to stay afloat. That group posted a $38 million loss last financial year, and its CEO said that after enjoying a recovery, things had become tough once again. Packaging giant Emcor said it was on the lookout for acquisitions after announcing a record net profit of $939 million. Financial stocks, think the big four banks, Magellan Financial, Macquarie Group and the like, had been the best market performers this year. But last week saw the financials tumble and consumer discretionary stocks and telecommunication companies outperform. Two standouts among the consumer discretionary stocks have been Wesfarmers, owner of Bunnings and Officeworks, and Domino's Pizza. Telstra is the leader among the telco stocks and it's up 35% this year. So far this year, consumer discretionary stocks are up nearly 25%, telcos are up 24%, and financials are 22% higher. Remember, straight after the show, stay listening for my chat to well-known market analyst Roger Montgomery about which consumer discretionary stocks he likes best. One of those discretionary stocks is Adairs, which sells homewares. It had an exceptional 2021 financial year with net profit up 80%. The Linen Lovers program is doing particularly well. Linen Lovers must join. Chief Executive Mark Ronan said he expected continued growth, including more, bigger stores, and Adairs' share price finished up 2% on Friday. And the Wiggles are going politically correct. I didn't realise they weren't. There'll be 4 new members of the children's group, 3 women, and apparently 2 of them will be wearing pants. It includes a 15-year-old who was originally from Ethiopia and is also a world champion in Latin dancing. So there'll be 2 yellows, 2 blues, 2 reds, and 2 purples. What's this got to do with business? Not much. Don't go anywhere because up next is our daily interview, and today's a great one for investors. I'm joined again by Roger Montgomery from Montgomery Investment Management. We take a look at discretionary retails on the ASX from JB Hi-Fi and Kogan to four-wheel drive accessories producer ARB. Roger reveals some of the stocks he's keeping an eye on and also shares his simple rule for making money on the share market. Whether you're an experienced investor or just getting started, don't miss this interview. Up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And after that, I'm joined by our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, for a look at the week in economics. Of course, there's plenty to discuss from last week too, including the jobs figures and what it all means for the coming months. That's Fear and Greed, the week ahead, out every Monday. It's Monday, the 23rd of August, 2021. I'm Sean Aylmer, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.